Greetings, Professor Ventsel, in the framework of the international and interdisciplinary project dedicated to subculture. First of all, could you please share a little bit about yourself and your studies about subcultures?
Okay, I'm an anthropologist, and as a fact, I see myself as a Siberian researcher. So I studied Siberia, still do a little bit, and now I'm doing research in post-Soviet countries. And the subculture thing, I never really thought I'm going to study it. I was always interested in it because I was involved in different subcultures, and somehow I also read this academic stuff, what's written about them. But I really had no such plan to study something like subcultures. And then I was in Halle, it was years ago, where I did my PhD at a Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology, and they opened a legal anthropology department there. And legal anthropology department had two directors, a couple, Franz and Gebet Bender-Beckmans, von Bender-Beckmans actually, who are one of founding fathers and mothers of legal anthropology. And then at some event, what is legal anthropology about? Is in general, you study people who have their own laws inside of let's say, mainstream society. And traditional legal anthropology, they study these different laws and how they coexist or do not coexist somewhere in Arabia, Indonesia, and those things. And I was in Holland in this event. I just told to Gebet that, you study your stuff somewhere in Indonesia or I don't know, Africa or Turkey, but here in Halle you have very strong punk scene who have their own laws, and they live inside the German society. And then Gebet said, "Oh, it's wonderful. We should study it." And she offered me money, and research money, I mean. And then I did this study. I wrote an article about it, and this article came around a little bit. And then one day I received a letter from England, from Hilary Pilkington. And Hilary Pilkington is a pretty big name in subcultural studies, but she's also pretty known in Russian studies, and Siberian studies are part of Russian studies because she studied youth culture. She was one of the first, or maybe the first Western researcher, sociologist who studied youth cultures in Russia and published about it. And then she asked me to come to a conference, and afterwards she put together a project about post-socialist punk. And they needed someone, and I said, okay. And we received the funding, and then we had it like 4 years. And I went back to East Germany because East Germany is a little bit like twilight zone in post-socialist studies. Somehow it's considered to be part of this post-socialist studies as a post-socialist, let's say, country or part or region. On the other hand, it's not. So you always have this discussion whether Eastern Germany is belongs to this Eastern European studies or post-socialist studies. But I was there, and it was a wonderful project. We studied punks in Russia, Vorkuta, Krasnodar, and St. Petersburg. Not some people did it. Then there were two people who studied punks in Croatia. I did East Germany. And then somebody studied Russian punks in England and Holland. And so somehow it developed in this way, and we published about it. And then I had the plan to write a book about it. And one reason was I still had money from the project to edit, for editing and so on. And this book took very long time, I think 6 years, from zero to the end, which has some reasons for that. And yeah, so it happened.
Thank you very much for your answer. Could you please share, if we take a general look, what kind of types of subcultures it will be possible to list, in your opinion?
Okay, we have like different groups, and I would say so. There is this academic understanding about, when you know this sociology subcultures, that subcultures, they appeared after the Second World War, starting with teddy boys, and then you had modernists, skinheads, punks, rockers, rastas, so on. But I would say so. The history shows us that none of those subcultures who ever appeared after the war, they did not die out. You still have teddy boys and modernists somewhere around. But for me, I think there is one big difference between subcultures. One is this electronic music or computer music, where basically the emphasis is on someone who makes the music in computer, or these days on telephone, or whatever, wherever they do this music, and then you have a singer. So you need basically you need a laptop, a microphone, and then you have all these guitar music based subcultures, where you need a band and you need a rehearsal room and you need guitars and you need more people who are involved in making music. So for me, I think this is the main difference between them. But it's very hard to say, because it's always also changing when you look at reggae. So reggae started as a music where you needed a band, you needed many people to make a song, and these days you also need one person who makes the song in computer and one microphone and one singer, all this dancehall stuff and modern roots music. It's hard to say what types of subcultures do you have. Another thing is that I don't know that so much, in this sense that I really don't know what is going on in the electronic music scene. So in the sense that how these subcultures function. Where are those big differences? It seems to me sometimes that is rock music based subcultures like metal and punk and so on, that they are more interested into face-to-face and direct contact with other people. And so all this communication, change of music that is going on in internet is important, but it's not that important. And then there is an assumption that the most emancipatory subcultures are actually metal and punk, in the sense that subcultures where women have the most freedom and the most the highest position, but I'm not so sure. Is it true?
All the subcultures that you mentioned, that they actually have a music foundation, if we can say so. But at the same time, according to the research that we already have right now, we see that we have a lot of different subcultures too that are not connected with the music. For example, extreme subcultures, when people jump from somewhere because they like it, because they like adrenaline and everything. Some other subcultures that are connected with sport, for example. We can say that they have their own idea, their own culture, cultures and everything, and of course the group of people that are united because of this idea. Do you consider other subcultures too, or subcultures that are based on the musical core?
When I teach subcultures in the university, then usually I say that there are three different concepts of subcultures. One comes from criminology or crime studies, and their subcultures means criminal deviant groups, usually this kind of petty crime and gangsters and so on. Then you have anthropological definition, which is that subcultures are subgroups of the mainstream society, and they could also be whatever. So you can have a subculture of office workers, for instance, a subculture of one big company, and then you have this sociological concept where subcultures are also equaled with youth cultures, and where style and music are kind of centerpiece. But I would say so. When I've read all this stuff, and one reason I wrote my book so long time was that I tried to figure out what the theory is, and I had my own problems with any kind of theory. For instance, there are books about criminological books about gangster cultures somewhere in American big cities. And this is about crime, about criminal networks. But somewhere behind the lines, you see that there's also very important is consuming, so big cars, going to parties, hip hop parties. So there is this kind of music also involved. When you go to sports, I'm doing climbing, so cliff climbing, for instance. And when you look at skaters and all the snowboarders, so this is definitely about the sport. But they also have their own style of dressing, outlooks, the style, and also very often you have their own music. There is snowboard music festivals, or skate punk used to be this kind of genre. So I think it's not so strict. And probably the problem with all this study is you have very different concepts, and people study within or inside these concepts. This was my problem with the book, that when you take these music youth cultures, or what we thought. So when we look at punk, in my case, so punk is not anymore a youth culture. So you have also people who are 50 or even more, 60 maybe. Yeah, the main core are young people. You have a lot of people who started in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, and they're still part of the scene. Another thing is that you cannot take subculture out of the society, and this is what this classical sociological theory does for me. So when you study punk, for instance, in Indonesia, you study how they dress, what kind of music do they like, and how did they get their music, and but you don't study that they are also Muslims. So how they bring this Indonesian culture inside the punk. And this is also in Germany, where Germans are car freaks, automobile freaks, and punks are also automobile freaks. So they love to have cars. So you have a lot of German mentality inside the German punk scene. And when you go to Russia, then you have a lot of Russian mentality inside. So when German punks drink beer, Russian punks tend to drink vodka, for instance. So they bring the culture with them. I don't know, do you know the book from, there is from Hilary Pilkington and some other Russian scholars, Russian skinheads? And just to find it, and because basically this is about neo-Nazi skinheads in Vorkuta. But when you know the Russian culture, the culture of these northern industrial towns, what I know as a Siberian researcher, then these guys are just proletarian thugs. You have them, which is called kopniki in Russia. They just dress differently, but there is the same kind of thugness and this violence. They hate all the migrants, especially those who are from Central Asia. So they bring all those things with the subculture, and subculture, yeah. And so my thesis when I wrote this book, and when I was thinking about subculture, is you have so many subcultures around. And there is even this term, supermarket of styles. So basically you have these days lots of styles, like on counter. You can go and choose whatever you want. But the question is, why certain people choose certain styles? And when you come from, let's say, northern Russian proletarian industrial town, then what suits you is a neo-Nazi skinheads of metal, because this is tough music for tough guys, people who drink a lot, people who are aggressive, people who fight a lot. So this is this sort of ideology of subculture. You don't go and be a hippie. So don't go and do yoga and all this meditation, and the other way around as well. So what I want to say is that every subculture has certain aesthetics and certain lifestyle and certain way how they understand the world, which is called ideology usually. And you go to that subculture when your own ideology, so what is in your head overlaps with the subculture ideology. I could never be a techno fan, so there are a lot of things I just don't like in this culture, and there are a lot of things I don't like in mainstream rock, and therefore, me myself, I always find interesting this punk and punk-related styles, because this is the way I felt very comfortable with the way of thinking. And I think there is a lot of things as well, because in my book, the center of my book is Halle is a small German town, East German town, and like a lot of these kind of towns, you have different groups of people there, also in the punk scene, and how these punk groups are divided or located is they are usually around some clubs or bars, so places where people hang out. And there were in the time of my fieldwork 3 places. One was for leftist, older, political conscious guys who did a lot of political works, charity, collecting money for refugees and all this sort of left-wing politics. And then there were one club which was way for younger guys who were into more anarcho-punk. But this place where I went to, this was actually around street punk. Street punk is a style of punk where which has very heavy drinking culture. So a lot of music and songs are about drinking, and a lot of events are about when you go to parties, you drink a lot. It's a hard music, it's a tough music. Street punk, it's also about masculinity, it's about fighting, it's very important. And it's no wonder that most guys who were hanging out in this pub were working class, because this is working class ethos. This is how working class guys in Germany understand the world. You drink a lot, you fight a lot, you work a lot, you feed your family, you feed yourself. Basically, this is about street punk, DIY. You are independent, you are tough, you drink a lot. And so this is what appeals you. So this is my concept of how subcultures attract people.
Thank you very much for your answer. It was very interesting to hear your experience in the study of subcultures. And you said very interesting thing that that this is very interesting question, why they choose a certain style. But tell me, please, how do you think what actually pushes one to become a member of some subculture?
First of all, subculture gives you a collective. I ended up in the early 90s in Berlin. I was then in a punk and skinhead stuff, and I started to go all to those underground places. And in the 90s, Berlin, especially East Berlin, it was a heaven for underground culture. You had a lot of empty houses, and in these houses you had illegal bars and clubs and so on. And then when I thought about it, one reason was that German society in these days, and probably also in those days, was very monocultural and German. So when you were a foreigner, especially when you spoke German with an accent, you always felt as kind of second rate. person. And the only place people really didn't look at your accent was the underground scene. It's very sad that nobody had really studied it in the 90s, but I'm very sure that especially Berlin's punk scene was more multicultural than let's say, Berlin itself. So you had a lot of Basques in there, Turks, Arabs, Polish, Russians, me, Estonian, and so on and so on, English Americans. And one reason was that your origin and accent didn't matter. And or take, I was also very interested in reggae. And when you went to the reggae scene at Berlin was very huge reggae city in those days. You had a lot of sound systems. And sound system is something that you have few guys who play records. Those days they were vinyl records, and then you have one guy who is MC. And those guys were usually black guys. And to be black in Germany those days was not a good thing. But then when you went to reggae and you were MC of sound system, you were the king. So the one thing is that subculture also offers you another career path. When you come from a sort of marginalized group, or you come from a social group that is at the bottom of society, then subculture offers you a place to be, something very big, a rock star, literally. You can have any girl, you can earn money, you can shine, you can travel a little bit, and you can earn money. But I think the first reason why subcultures do exist and why people go to that, they find friends and collectives. And you also have, and I think punk in some stages, for instance, early punk in the States, early 80s, late 70s, when you look at these videos, then you look, there are a lot of skinny schoolboys. We call these days the nerds, the boys who do not fit into this sort of mainstream American society. And then they went and found their friends in this new exciting punk scene. And what I've heard, so also skate punk was very much about the young kids who had problems in school and in home, and then they discovered this style that gave this way for self-expression, skating and doing music and partying together. And I think this is very important. Another thing is, and there I also find the problems with this theoretical literature, especially when it comes to punk. I don't know how much you know this sociological punk theory, but there are few things that do not, let's say, that are not relevant anymore if they ever were. One postulate, as I said, is that subculture is a youth culture, which is not the case anymore. Another thing is that, especially when it comes to punk, that punk is about provocation, which is also not the case anymore. I don't think punks really shock anybody these days. Maybe somewhere in Indonesia or Iran or or African states where they're very new and exotic, but I think you have very hardly any grandma who is shocked when she sees punk. What was the case 20 years ago, so 30 years ago. And then there is one postulate that punk is nihilistic. And I don't know where this nihilism comes, but actually punk is about fun. So you go and party, you drink, you meet your partners, you have sex. And so basically, this is, I looked few of your videos, and my old friend Kevin Watson was also in your series. And I remember how Kevin told me about skinhead scene in the 80s. So basically, there was a big thing in England or in the UK, they were teenagers, and the big thing was about girls. So basically they went to concerts where the girls were. And as I said, so we first of all, we went to OI, but then we went to ska concerts because all the girls went to ska concerts. And so basically subculture is a lot of fun. And I think this is also very important, but why people go to these places. They have party.
Thank you very much for your answer. It is very interesting. Next question is about your approach to research a subculture, because if we look at other people, they use different approaches. Somebody uses photography, somebody uses some sources, somebody goes inside in the subculture and become a member of it. So could you please share about your approaches in researching subcultures and your experience about this?
As an anthropologist, so in anthropology, you do a lot what is called participants observation. So you go somewhere and you live this life with those people you want to study. And in my case, it was a little bit unusual for anthropology because I lived in Halle and I knew all those people. And usually in anthropology, it is you have a project and you go somewhere and then you start doing your research. You try to infiltrate into the community, let's say so. And then after some time, people get used to you, you lived with them, and some of them become your friends. In my case, it was other way around. So I had this money to do research, and I went to my friends and said, okay, I'm going to study. And I thought that they say no, but they were actually very enthusiastic about it. And I think in retrospective, what the reason was because as a working class, as an unemployed working class, you are in Germany basically at the bottom of society. So there is only, let's say, people with black color or black skin are lower than you are. And they were very glad that somebody pays attention to them, that somebody sees that they are worth to study and that they are, let's say, personalities. I think this was the reason. And what I did, my main sort of method was just doing this participant observation. I went to work with those guys. Most of those guys were construction workers. I went to discuss construction sites with them. I traveled with bands. I went with what is very important in Germany is going to festivals. So group of people, 10, 20, 30, 40, and they just go to some festival. They have their own camp, their tents there. They have party. They come back together afterwards. So I did this. So this was my main, and then I just took notes. And this is the biggest problem of anthropology for many other disciplines, is that your main source is a field diary, not questionnaires and nothing else. What I also did a lot was also photographing and videotaping events. And then afterwards, when I was in this British project with Hilary Pilkington and so on, this was a sociological project, and we had then an obligation to make interviews, formal interviews. And so I conducted something like 20 interviews or so, 20, 30 interviews as the plan was. Yes, interviews is a little bit difficult thing for me. I don't like making interviews. Interviews is very formal. It's a very different situation. And in most cases, my experience shows, both in Siberia and in Eastern Germany, that when you make interviews with people who are not used to it, then they change a lot. They choose very carefully what they speak to you. They even change the language. For instance, when my friends, they talk to me in Saxon on Haltisch, this local dialect, and in interviews they usually spoke in, let's say, literary German, and this is a huge difference in Germany, these languages. Yes, I did also those interviews, and then later we compared in a project or field material, so field diaries and also transcriptions of interviews. But when it comes to the, let's say, research and subcultures, basically there are, as far as I understand, two schools. One is that says that in order to study subcultures, you also need to have your own experience with subcultures. And the second says that this is not necessary. And this is this informal even conflict within subculture studies. It's not published, it's not academic, but this is something people talk about on conferences after later when they go to the pub for a beer. And there are pros and cons, let's say, in both sides. I believe, because okay, I am the one who has the subculture background, and I believe that in certain cases I can understand some things faster or better, but then again, sometimes it could be also an illusion. You are not that neutral as people are who have never studied it, who do not have this kind of involvement.
Would you agree with the statement that in today's world, almost every citizen of the planet belongs to a certain subculture, even sometimes without actually realizing it?
Yes, I think that could be true in the anthropological sense, that every group culture is certain subculture, and yeah, I fully agree with it. And also that we not always we don't have a name for that, but you know this effect when people ask, are our people there? So nashi and nie nashi, so in Russian. So basically this is the division, and I think it works in many, it works and it exists, and it also exists everywhere.
Dr. Ventsel, could you please share something that I didn't ask to you, but you think that this is very important to know for our viewers?
I think there are two things what I also somehow tried to put into the book. I go back to Gavin Watson again when we talked about subcultures years ago, and he said, so what is this kind of people perception of skinheads is that, and he said literally that skinheads are people who dress like skinheads. They do live in a skinhead town, listen to the skinhead music and do skinhead things. So basically that means that people think the skinheads are something like a close group outside of society, and this is not true. And I think academically this connection between the mainstream society and the subculture is not so well studied. So for instance, I looked at the same phenomenon. So people who are old, so older subculturalists, so who have families, who go to work. So what about them? And there is very little research about them. There is some research about bands. So when you're a musician, you have your family. So how you put together, let's say, touring and recording and your family. But people who are doctors, who are construction worker, who work in office or work in different cases, and they have families and normal families, but they also but they also are rock and roll fans, they are punks, they are whatever they are. How that plays together. So how can you be a skinhead and a lawyer, for instance? I know these cases, and you can be. Basically, people put those things together, and the conflict is actually smaller than you think. So people combine these different lifestyles. Another thing, I think, what is also a problem, or what comes not out in the academic studies, is that subcultures are, let's say, interconnected. When you look at, I know also Ross Heifler was one of your interviews. I know him personally. I've met him. I know his, hardcore book and this goth book. But this is a very typical. So you have a book about hardcore and you have a book about goths. So this is a very distinctive scene. But when you look at it, and I think it is very much globally, around punk, you have like punks and skinheads. They go to the same concerts, they share the music. You have very few concerts where you have only skinheads or only punks in Germany, at least. Punks and some skinheads also go to hardcore concerts. So you have skinheads very often go to psychobilly. When you are into reggae, then you also reggae and hip hop are very much connected. Or in the UK, reggae music and drum and bass are connected. So you have these affiliated subcultures who somehow share the fashion, but also share the music. People nevertheless, often have their very distinctive identity. So there are hip hop fans who go to reggae concerts, or reggae fans who go to hip hop concerts. People tend to have like one identity in this sense, but there is no this very strict division between subcultures. They do not exist also in a subculture bubble. They somehow communicate with each other. And this is something I think this kind of connection is not very well studied.
Thank you very much.